Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. It looks like with a 37% win, you guys have decided that holding people accountable is the hardest thing to get right in safety leadership. And I can agree with that. Sometimes, that workplace responsibility system, it's a complex situation in safety, 100%. But that being said, we're going to get to our next presentation. We have a session on safety management for scaffolds, shoring, and formwork. So we will have a discussion on the topic with Bill Gessell and Justin Lasnier. With 18 years at the SCSA, Bill's experience spans from advising and training field personnel to conducting safety audits and developing comprehensive safety training. Bill is always looking for innovative ways to bring safety to the industry using technology and best practices to achieve superior risk management.
Justin is an Associate Dean at SIIT, leading a province-wide portfolio of trades and industrial training programs across Saskatchewan. He holds a Master of Science in Occupational Health and Safety and is a journeyperson scaffolder with hands-on experience across industrial job sites in Western Canada. He's also a certified project management professional at NCSO and a board member of the SCSA. He brings over 20 years of experience in the construction, education, and industrial sectors. Welcome.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Morning.
The floor is yours.
Morning. All right. Well, good morning, Justin. Thank you for jumping in here with me on this conversation. I selected you because I think you have a great experience all the way from, as you said, moving through your journeyperson's career into the safety field. And I wanted to start off kind of with one question that I've been thinking about here this morning, which is, you didn't start as a supervisor, of course. You started with your tool belt on a field. Was there a specific moment in your early days that changed the way that you looked at scaffolding and scaffolding safety?
Well, I mean, I think it's a progression. I remember being very proud of my first build, even if it was 2 feet off the ground, just so an operator could turn a valve, and ultimately progressing into more of the decision making within a crew, and being a journey person, leading apprentices, and then moving into the office, into management. Every progression you learn from your mistakes, and there are always going to be mistakes, and that's part of success. And so I think ultimately, learning from all of those mistakes and getting the opportunity to share that information and that expertise has gone a long way, and it's done me good. I think scaffolding is like any other trade. There are roofers, they're working at heights, very difficult conditions in the elements, or painters, you'd be carrying a lot of heavy things. So I think ultimately great field to be in, and you never know where it'll take you.
Okay. I was kind of thinking, like, we see scaffolding on just about every site in Saskatchewan, from residential to commercial to our industrial projects. But as leaders, sometimes do you think it gets seen as just part of the scenery of the site? And is that something that becomes kind of a dangerous habit to get into?
Well, I'd like to give credit to the scaffolders. If they built it nice enough that people are not seeing them, that means they did something right. Oftentimes, if there is a mistake, they'll get pointed out pretty quick. But, assuming that we've got, experienced workers, they're building the scaffolds, you may be walking by them day to day, and you may not be thinking about them too much. But, bringing up the topic today, I'm really hoping people are going to be curious about the scaffolds and the work that's involved in building them. So, the same way, I'll tell you a story about myself. I bought a minivan a few years ago, and as soon as I bought it, I would see them everywhere after that. And I think it's the same thing with scaffolding. Once you start paying attention to them a little bit more, you'll start seeing them everywhere and noticing things, and then it snowballs, right? You get more knowledge about them, and they may be more visible after that. But ultimately, I think the important thing is, and there's so many analogies, but having a strong foundation to any scaffolding, and that's like anything in life. Having a strong base is an analogy for anything, even for painters. A lot of it is preparation, and then you do the work afterwards, and it's so quick. But so I see a lot of commonalities between the scaffolding trades and so many other trades.
Just to tie into that, I think that I took for granted that scaffolding was just available on site and a tool to use to get the project done. Probably about 20 years ago, I stepped into a classroom at the SCSA and took a scaffolding course. And at the time, I walked in with kind of a bit of an arrogance to me. I've been using it for a decade. I wasn't quite sure that I was going to learn anything. I can tell you after that class, I walked out and then everything became visible. As you said, I started to notice it more. I started to see, improper planking and foundations and improper setup. And it just took a little bit of education, a little bit of awareness to be able to open my eyes to that and kind of pull the curtains back on. It wasn't just a standard piece of equipment seen on site. Tying more into that, has there been, out of the hundreds of builds that you've seen, Justin, anything that you could say, like what's a telltale sign if you were to walk onto a site that says this organization, this project cares about scaffolding safety?
Yeah, I've seen some good builds. I've seen some shaky ones, and I think one of the ways that you would know if it's a good build, it's a non-scaffolder would feel comfortable going on it. It's easy for a scaffolder to say, it's a good build. They're comfortable working at heights. They're comfortable being on the gear, on those planks, looking 20 feet down or climbing a ladder. They're comfortable. They do it every day. So I think in terms of risk tolerance, you got to put yourself in the shoes in the scaffold user and say, how do I make this person comfortable? Most times, if there's a little bit of a shake to it, people will not feel comfortable and they'll assume that it's unsafe, right? So the more tie-ins, the more bracing that you can put in there to make the user comfortable, at the end of the day, people will feel comfortable on the scaffolding and will feel comfortable utilizing the equipment. And at the end of the day, it's having sort of that empathy for the user and trying to put yourself in their shoes and say, how would I feel as somebody using this scaffold for the first time, or somebody's brand new to the site or brand new to the construction industry? How would I want this scaffold built?
Okay. I'd like to actually toss out into the comments, and we have a lot of professionals here in attendance today. And I'm sure whether it's on your projects or on projects that you drive past, you see something that instantly looks to you and says, oh, yes, there we go. That's an organization. That's a company that's paying close attention. I'd really enjoy if you threw something into the comments that kind of speaks to even a couple of simple words on what you see driving down the street that really says, oh, yeah, there we go. They're taking the time and the effort. We'd like to come into that as well, too. So if you happen to see anything or have any comments along that, please put that in the comment. Justin and I'll take a look at that as that goes. You were talking about the new workers, and I want to kind of catch into a little bit of, again, when you first started, was there somebody that you worked with that had, an experienced person that you were following that you could, without speaking to their name directly, did you have that mentor, that person that helped guide you into saying, this isn't how we do this, or this is how we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. one of the things I realized early on is I'm going to be on the ground for the first year or first several months, just learning knots, learning terminology and things like that. And so for me, that was quite difficult because, you know, you want to be in the action. You want to be the one that's up there. And there's a bit of a glory component of being the one building. Everybody gets exciting about building, not so much about dismantling or being on the ground. So as a new scaffold builder, I was really excited about getting my harness and being able to go up there, even if it's just chaining up gear. But as you're learning, you're realizing that you know, working at heights, your legs may shake and you will get uncomfortable because there is a bit of a learning curve for being, you know, on the side of a building or on a steel beam and so on. So, you know, I had a journey person that offered some advice. He was a bit on the heavier side. I would say he's about 300 pounds or something like that. And he could just get around like a ballerina. That's how I would express it. Like he had so much finesse and could walk across a tube. And he advised me to trust the gear. And that may be hard. But, you know, if I saw him walk across a 20-foot tube, I saw the bend, but I really saw him test the limits to what the equipment could do. And ultimately, the gear is engineered to withstand specific loads. And so learning to trust the gear as it's intended and based on its weight capacities, I think it's a good way, a tangible way of understanding how to move forward with building scaffolds. Because at the end of the day, these scaffolds aren't built based on feelings. You know, you're not building them on a gut feeling. Oh yeah, this seems like a good span or this is a good height. There are specific proportions to them all, and so you know, they're meant to support people, and so we got to build them specifically to those specs, right?
Yeah, I just want to tie into what you had just said about trying to impress the younger workers. I remember quite clearly trying to put as many scaffold planks on my shoulder as possible, just so I could impress somebody, that I could carry an extreme amount of weight. I remember my knees buckling as I was walking from the laydown yard to where we were sitting up. And when I got there, I remember being not called out for being, you know, all that strong and whatever. I got called out for being ridiculous, for trying to do something well beyond the capacity, not using the mechanical advantages we had. In my head, I thought I was being impressive, but it was good to have some competent people that backed up and said, hey, that wasn't smart. You didn't impress anybody. You put yourself at risk, and to kind of pull back from that behavior. One of the other things too that we talk about, like within the regulations, again, tying into that competent person thing, we see the wallet card, right? We see the roll on to site and they've received some training and they show the supervisor and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm competent. I took some training. I'm good to go. In the real world, what does a supervisor, what do leaders need to do to confirm that competency within their workers? Like, what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, having that certification issued through the Trade Commission or through other accrediting bodies is definitely a good step in hiring the right people for the work. But I mean, that doesn't take away from a supervisor's responsibilities to do some check-ins with staff and with some workers and really test that understanding. You know, you can do that in a subtle way where you're coming from a place of curiosity and asking questions. You know, you're not testing anybody or challenging anybody's knowledge or anything like that. That usually doesn't go over very well. But, you know, you can simply do some checks and verifications on why somebody would do the way they do it. And, we go back to the use of power tools versus hand saws, or the ability to use just sheer force versus using a telehandler. I mean, some of these tools are available, and you'll see not only will the experienced workers be very technical on the scaffold equipment, but they'll be so advanced on the logistical side of things, how to bring gear around, or how to tear it down appropriately, how to chain gear up appropriately. So again, scaffolding and trades in general is not just about understanding all the math or understanding the builds itself. It's really how to deal with people, how to get the work done efficiently. And, you'll only learn that by doing the work. You will not learn that by taking a certificate or doing a ticket. Those are the kind of things, tricks of the trades you'll learn over time.
Yeah. So again, coming to the idea that competency is knowledge, training, and experience, not just that training course. A couple of the comments that came in based upon what you see when you drive down the street, they're putting up in the on the screen now. Workers wearing proper fall protection and hard hats in residential construction gives reasonable confidence. I can say it's come a long ways, absolutely. In the time that I've been here, when we first started conducting some site visits, there was some shaky at best PPE use out there, and you see it's come around where the personal protective equipment has definitely become more common in areas. Some other good comments about guardrails and warning signs and such being placed. So when you're driving down the street, you take a look at it, you go, there we go. They have a good idea what they're doing. They put some proper planning and thought into that. Sort of speaking about some proper planning and thought, like I'm sure that you've encountered some complex builds, both in your time on the tools and in your time, excuse me, as a safety leader. Could you explain some of the steps that you would have took, from the point of taking on a project that maybe isn't just a standard set of some straight up down bays, but where it's more complex than that, and what you did to try to overcome that, not just from the planning side, but from that competency side all the way through to the usage stuff. Do you have any examples you could talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one example that comes to mind would be a build that I helped design in British Columbia. It's inside of a penstock. So they're using they were using that scaffold, and it's a rolling scaffold. I think we've all heard of rolling scaffolds. They're quite useful, but this one would go down that penstock, which is basically a huge tube. And they want to be able to reach everywhere within it to paint it and to coat it and to seal it. Instead of scaffolding the whole penstock, they had this design, and that was at my time with Brand Safeway. So, looking at the weight of it, our ability to reach every single the perimeter of that surface to be worked on. I mean, this is a one-of-a-kind build that I was so happy to work on. The one challenging thing is, as well, it was a confined space. We were going to be working with paint in there. There was going to be combustibles. And so at the end of the day, we're designing a scaffold in a really difficult place to be put in. Usually when you say you got a rolling scaffold, it's got to be locked and on a very flat surface. Well, this was totally the opposite of that. But again, meeting the client's requirements is about having a good conversation, really understanding what they're looking to get at the end of the day, and then utilizing different types of gear. Another way that we were quite ingenious is using different Betamax hoists. I remember on the K+S site, and honestly, they had great safety culture there. I want to mention that. Even we were talking about handrails earlier. Well, sometimes they'd go even beyond that and put meshing on in and above the guardrails to prevent things from falling over. But a Betamax will definitely reduce the amount of gear that's handled by your workers. And if you're thinking in terms of man hours and putting people at risk going up and down staircases and bringing things up at heights, there's going to be a break-even point where you're going to be utilizing different types of machinery to bring things up versus getting it carried up. So understanding in how you can reduce that risk and how you can ensure your project is successful. And at the planning stage, you bring up those options, you have those discussions, and then sometimes utilizing trusses or luma beams at the planning stage because that gear may not be available at the yard, and leaving it up to the journey person or the crew to decide what needs to be built. If that gear is not available, they don't want to wait around for it to be ordered, and that may take weeks. So again, goes back to planning, goes back to the implementing the builds the best way they can be done.
I just want to tie back into we saw a picture of that build that you did, that extensive rolling scaffold. Now, from that point of view, and here it's back up here again. This was being built for other trades, of course, right? You were coming in as the contractor doing the scaffold build. Was there a lot of coordination and conversation with their supervision and their leadership to explain the process, how this works? I assume it wasn't a green tag and a handshake that led to the other trades using this. It's kind of tying into like what type of steps do supervisors and companies and leaders need to make sure that they have before they just step onto something like this?
Yeah, the industry has really shifted from a scaffold contractor to just do scaffolding. We were seeing scaffold contractors doing insulation, paint, rope access. And so you've got multiple trades being able to come together and have their input on how a build should be designed and what are some of the requirements for the work to happen. Because ultimately, the scaffolders, they don't build this for themselves. They're going to be building this for another trade to do their own work. And it's all temporary. So you don't want to overbuild it and spend too much time and resources on doing it. But you also don't want to underbuild it where there's going to be some safety hazards and it's not going to meet your client's requirements. So there's that fine balance between it all. And in this particular situation, we were working with a group out of Quebec, and my role was around on the safety side and on the scaffolding component side as well. So the design itself was done by us and approved by an engineer, because at the end of the day, you need that stamp, you need that confirmation that it's all kosher, it's all great. So the thing about construction is there's always going to be changes. There's always going to be somebody that brings in more variables down the line. So, I mean, the design can be great, but knowing to expect changes down the line is key. And I think having the right people on your crews are going to go a long way. You want people that are cooperative, that are accepting of company policies, they're accommodating, they're patient. And so it's about teamwork again. So having the right people that are going to be okay with taking on a project like this, you want to select people that are very comfortable with change and are very adaptive. And so knowing who is on your crew, knowing who is the right person to do this project is key. And I think management and supervision have a responsibility in not only seeing the worker for their certificate, but really knowing them as an individual and saying, this kind of build is going to be right for this person.
Yeah. I'd like to explore that a little bit further. I'd also like to toss something into the chat that, or into the comment section here that maybe can help us explore this a little bit further as well. When you said selecting the right people, having that experience stuff, with the industry now aging, and with a lot of that senior knowledge potentially at retirement age, what do you think is some of the strategies that both the industry as a whole can go forward to try to maintain that level of knowledge or to build it? Like, are we losing? Is it going to be difficult for organizations to have experienced, competent people to build something that extensive in the future? And from the comment side of it, if companies are experiencing that sort of shift where their competent, experienced people are packing it in for the lake full time, is there some sort of strategies that you're looking to put into place to prevent that or to make sure that knowledge isn't lost? But I'll let you speak to that, Jess.
Yeah, I'm a very optimistic kind of person, and but you know, the facts are there. People are constantly looking for tradespeople, and that's not just in the scaffold world. It could be carpentry, it could be electrical, plumbing. So we're going to need more tradespeople. That's a very, very clean cut kind of statement. The one thing I can say, and it kind of ties back to what I was talking about, finding the right people for this job. I think ultimately, if we're able to find somebody who's actually their personality aligns well with the scaffolding, we're going to get a better return on investment on that person. So we're looking to sort of identify somebody's personality, and odds are if they fit well with that job, they're going to be in that role for a longer period. And at the end of the day, these advancements in recruitment and training, I think are going to balance out some of the issues we're dealing with, large pool of retirees. So, I'm looking at the predictive index, and some of the personalities we would be looking for new workers for the scaffolding trade would be operator, guardian, or artisan. So if you're not familiar with the predictive index, for sure it's the PI. You can look it up after this, and you could find your own personality related to all kinds of different jobs. But as a scaffolder, you would want somebody that's patient, conscientious, relaxed, cooperative, and a team worker, because you're always going to be relying on other people when you're scaffolding. There's going to have to be somebody on the ground, somebody pulling up gear, somebody assembling it. So, you're not an accountant sitting in a dark corner by yourself punching in numbers. You got to be a team player when you're a scaffolder. And so investing in the people that have the right drive and the right personality for this trade, I think is key for long-term of this trade and this level of expertise. And so, if you're forcing somebody to be in a trade they're not really meant to be, or they're gonna hate it all day long, that's going to be much tougher than finding somebody that's fully comfortable and they love it. I've worked with people that just think it's such a great job, and they say it's like building Lego, and they just love it. And I'm sure those kind of people are definitely within these types of personalities, right?
Yeah, I've been a huge fan and worked with different organizations to move forward engagement in the skilled trades and technologies. And I like the infographic that was just up there of the PI, the artisan point, and really tying into that this isn't, just grunt work, that building a safe, proper scaffold is an art. Building it so that when you are turning it over or allowing others to work on top of it, that their level of comfort is the same as walking on the ground, right? That we're trying to build those type of things. And you do have to be an artisan to put that together, and to be not just skilled at the task, but to be able to perform it properly. I like some of that, the information that you had talked about into there. And when you brought up the the engineers. Another question that kind of comes up that might want to talk into now is if, I'm sure other contractors have reached out to you in the past in your previous role with an organization that was a supply organization. But for those that are in attendance today, I don't know if it's always such common knowledge that, you don't just have to use a ladder, or you don't just have to, go and grab and try to put something together, that there are professional organizations out there. You talked about engineers. How do these ones support that whole idea of building safe, proper functioning scaffolds for our industry?
Yeah, so, I'll give you an example. So I think it was my first week as a regional safety manager with, this global scaffold company. And we got a letter in the mail right away. Basically, we had done something wrong. And we had a scaffold tip over, actually. So it's quite serious. Considered a dangerous occurrence. So, finding out the root cause and understanding what had happened there was key. And so initially the build was constructed outdoors, and it was meant to reach, I think, a steel column, 20 or 30 feet up in the air. It had been modified for the winter months, and hoarding or tarping was added on the outside. And so at that point, once it becomes a hoarding, we should have taken on additional steps and got that engineered. But within the process of adding or modifying a scaffold, you got to relook at the initial scope and think about, are engineers required at this point? Is it really still the same scope that we were looking at initially? And so that's one example when those kind of requirements come into play. Obviously, a scaffold, wind will just blow right through it. But as soon as you're putting tarps on it, it's like it's really easy for it to blow over, right? Because you've got wind that's getting hit on the tarp. So that being said, I've dealt with situations like that where it's really important to slow down, stop, ensuring that all the changes you're doing are not going to be affecting your requirements. And so sometimes it seems like an easy fix. Oh yeah, just do this quick fix, but you really got to slow down, stop, and ensure there are no deeper implication that you would need to hire an engineer or experts to help you in that sense, right?
I think that some of the simplest stuff that I can explain about it is during our courses where we deliver some general scaffold safety. We talk about wind load, and everybody kind of pays attention. And then when you bring up a practical example of, have you ever tried to carry a 4x8 sheet of plywood in the wind? And then everybody shakes their head and goes, oh yeah, I have. And it's kind of, you say, okay, now take that and times that by 5 or 6 or whatever it is to the square footage of a large hoarding tarp, and apply that force to the side of a scaffold that's in use. They often, the understanding comes a lot quicker at that point. One thing, as you kind of brought up, we talk about like inspection preventing delay, as you had said, right? Like if you put in some time to look at some stuff, it can pay off in the end with return on investments. You did provide a bit of an example. Now, with that scaffolding that had overturned, was there an opportunity that maybe more frequent inspections might have caught something that was deteriorating, or was this a situation where probably just reaching out to a competent person for advice might have been the corrective action for that one? Yeah, so once you add that hoarding on it, then you got to have some metal wiring and tied back to concrete barriers and things like that, just to really ensure it's stable. But when it comes down to understanding the wind load and the size of the scaffold, yeah, that's generally up to beyond a journey person to determine that. You obviously
I wouldn't suggest sort of doing your own math on that. You know, getting a hold of an engineer to determine those, because a lot of the time these are one-offs, and so you may not have like a drawing to refer back to because every scaffold will be different. And so but there are simple things that all scaffolders should do, you know, when it comes to securing gear at nighttime, you know, because you will be bringing up plywood, like you said, up, and you're going to be ready to sheet the next day. Well, you can't assume that overnight that plywood is just going to be under the same conditions as the next morning. And so, you know, if it's throwing a few nails in it to secure them together or secure them to your scaffold is just common practice that you'll see is securing the gear. And that's important. You know, you never know what their conditions are going to be the next day or the next morning. And you just don't want an emergency call where you have to bring people back to secure the gear. So a bit of planning ahead, weighing things down, possibly throwing a pile of right angle on your sheet of plywood so you know it's not just going to fly off is good practice, right?
I want to stay on that bit of a subject for for a couple of seconds here. 2 days ago, you would have got a suntan. Today, you might get frostbite. From a supervisor point of view, and where you would have scaffolding in our current climate that can change within hours or within days, is there an importance to that before every use inspection, like to have competent people inspecting it, you know, daily when in use and before each use? Is there a good value to that?
Totally. And you know, the legislation is quite clear on inspections, and you know, that's for every contractor to decide how they're going to do it. But you know, my recommendation is take a walk down to your scaffold, get out of the truck, take the time to walk around and to go on the scaffold, to give it a shake, you know, to kick the toe board, to do a little jump, and however else you want to make sure it's set up properly. Because you know, there are new ways, electronic inspections or signatures, and those things are really beneficial, especially when you're working with a large site or a lot of different scaffolding. Those tools are very handy, but nothing beats, you know, having that face-to-face with your scaffold. So recommending that is really important, and from my perspective.
I made a little note here. The permission to pause. A leader should celebrate a worker who says it's too windy or takes a few minutes to take a look at that scaffolding. I think that again, it gets seen as just a tool on a site, and it's there for a purpose. And sometimes I think the actual risk that even, you know, small scale scaffoldings pose on a site kind of gets overlooked, as far as it was good yesterday, it should be good today. What possibly could have gone wrong? I do want to talk a little bit about, you had mentioned and touched on planning ahead, and you and I had spoke about this earlier, and we had already touched on it a bit when it goes into developing those tubes and whatnot. From a point of view of a contractor or an employer that is maybe looking at doing a smaller scale project or a larger scale project, we know that, you know, within the industrial field, there are organizations that support that. But let's say that you're doing a small commercial build. Is it out of touch for a small contractor to reach out to a supplier to help them develop a plan to go forward for a proper scaffolding, even if it's short term or really not all that extensive? In your time in the supply world is where I'm trying to get to. Was there everything from those smaller, you know, we're going to apply stucco product to a home, all the way through to the large scale stuff?
Yeah, I think people would Google scaffolding, and you know, they made a call our branch and ask, you know, we're doing this kind of project, can you help us out? And I think our operations manager, you know, would have a conversation, sort of understand if it was something they would be willing to take on. You know, if it was they would just require frame scaffold. They were often directed to like Home Depot or somewhere like that where they could get that kind of equipment. So depending on the size of the vendor you're working with, sometimes they'll only be using system scaffold. They'll only be using tube and clamp. But there is a place, time and a place for baker scaffold or frame scaffold. And at the end of the day, you see those used a lot of time with drywall or painters, and those are obviously really useful and are often they're often used in the construction industry. So, but for expertise and knowledge, I think talking to a training provider or industry supplier, always a good opportunity. Same way you could talk to a PPE supplier about masks or glasses. I think you could talk to a vendor the same way for your needs.
Nice. Yeah, we just provided a course here last week, and we'd worked through some of the products, and the participants in the course were amazed at how not simple, because it's technical, but how quick and easy something like system scaffolding, like layer scaffolding, went together, and the idea that, hey, we could maybe integrate this into what we're doing in our project, our plant, or otherwise, but not knowing about that product, sort of they were stuck trying to build stuff out of frame scaffold and manipulate frame scaffold, maybe unsafely, to perform a task when there are better products available out there. I think the idea that reaching out to these suppliers and asking, hey, is there something that can meet my needs a little bit better than what we currently have? I just often, as you touched on it too, is that you can get some of these products from retailers, from small rental organizations for use, and even these internal ones, the bakers and whatnot. But I think that the risk still exists where I think it's maybe even a bit more at that point, where because it's easy to obtain and there's no real questions to be asked about the use of it, that it can be used improperly. And I think that that's where we run into a lot of during our inspections. So when our advisors are out and you see some stuff and you kind of wonder what mad genius put this together, because it's a combination of stuff put together. But to be able to ask those experts and go forward, and I guess that all really comes back to, again, that competency, right? Having a competent person that is leading the build, that can help provide that understanding about the proper way to do it and to put it forward. I see it from one of the earlier questions that we had asked, the answer came up is when we had asked around the idea is it important? It is important for crews to be interactive with other crews. And I think that as the scaffold moves, as the project shifts, as the project changes and other crews are moving from using it to moving, and then there's dismantling and demobilization and stuff, I think that communication becomes a huge sort of importance for safe use of the scaffold. Do you have any like, again, from your role as the safety coordinator for an organization, was there anything that you can share with our group today that you found was effective, especially on those large multi-employer sites where everybody is potentially using the product that you installed and making sure that it's staying as safe as possible?
Yeah, like I totally agree with the need for scaffolders to be more collaborative instead of being more independent. Equally, I think they have to be reserved and sociable. They definitely need to be steady and precise. So at the end of the day, everybody's got a responsibility sort of to speak up, and you see that with different programs within different companies. Everybody has the same voice. Everybody's equal. Everybody can speak up. Everybody owns safety. So, if everybody's got that same culture that their opinion and their voice can be heard, I think that's a really good place to start. Ultimately, supervision, management, they'll likely have the final say. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people just want to be heard, and they'll want to feel safe in sharing information like that. And I remember reading about a study done through by Google. I think over a couple of years, they had studied, what makes a team so good. And they had, I think that project was called Aristotle. And they had so many different crews, like experienced people, young people, virtual teams. And they said the number one indicator of success was psychological safety. They said, if you're and doing what you got to do, but psychological safety was number one. And that really meant about, am I able to speak up without fear of being, either making fun of or getting written up or anything else like that. So psychological safety goes a long way. And I think you brought that up earlier. But, having scaffolding on gear, on sites, having everybody just use it freely. It's a day-to-day assurance that you need to have people on site ready and able to make sure it's done right and done safely.
One of the follow-up questions to that is, you can't be on every site at every moment of every time. Is there kind of an idea, I've talked about this before in a previous presentation, about the invisible supervisor? Do you believe that that's an effective way to empower the workers so that they're not just performing the tasks based on enforcement, but understanding for their own personal safety? Is that that concept of invisible supervisor, or do you think that there's maybe more of a need for more direct on-site continuous safety? I hate to put you on the hot spot that way, but.
No, I love it. And I see our backdrop here with somebody with a cape on and a hard hat. We're thinking, I'm the supervisor or I'm the safety. I have to be a hero. And there's actually some people that go against that. They're anti-hero, and they're saying, I can't do it all for everybody, right? I can only do so much. What I always say is have those conversations with your crews. If it's either toolbox, safety meetings, informal check-ins, formal safety inspections, most companies will have a viable way to communicate their requirements and their needs. Even kicking off with the right orientation, the right onboarding, to have people sign off on all of those policies. But at the end of the day, you can't be a hero. You can't do it all for everybody. And there's got to be, you got to document. You got to have your due diligence done. And, there's different ways of getting that documentation done that you're really, what you're asking for is clearly understood by your crew. But when it comes down to it is oftentimes, if you're getting a stack of paper to sign versus having a frank conversation that is informal, over a sandwich or over a cup of water, when people's guards are down, I think you'll get through to people much better that way. If it's over coffee versus in the moment when it's heated, people, may not be so responsive to coaching in that way. But if you're bringing it from an approach where, you're really just trying to understand why they do what they do, and then bring in that coaching, I think that goes a long way. And that's supervision 101, and it's knowing how to deal with people, right?
Just sort of a follow-up to that, but is there anything specific that you can make mention to, or a rewarding moment where you saw that safety value, that instruction provided by a supervisor kind of came through, right? Where your workers stepped up to a task, or where the field staff brought something to your attention that kind of made you say, yeah, we've done this right. We've done the right training. We've conducted the right inspections. They knew what they were doing. Is there anything that you could tie to that?
Personally, I've had, everybody makes mistakes, and I've said it before, is failure is part of success. So, we've got to look at it from an aspect that there are going to be mistakes, there are going to be incidents. The model of zero incidents and aiming for perfection is outdated. So the best way to build a team is to have trust and to have people bring forward situations where there was a near miss, where there was something that was unsafe. And you'll see that a lot of time with behavioral based cards or submissions. People will send those in. They're often incentivized or required to submit a set amount. A lot of time on different sites, and you'll build that awareness, you'll build that sharing of knowledge, and it should really just be nobody's at fault, nobody's getting in trouble for this. You got to share what you see, what you learned. And that's where you've got a solid team that's trusting, and they really share that information. And if it's constantly around hand injury, or it's constantly around tripping hazards or slipping, then statistically you'll want to focus on that on your upcoming toolboxes, and you'll want to be more proactive around sanding, shoveling, upgrading your gloves to impact. The list is long of what you could be focusing on, but really it's about hearing from your team, setting up a system where that information can be shared with you, and then being consistent, being consistent with what is the process when this happens. I'll give you an example. If there's defective gear, it's no good, and you got to take it out of service. There's no cheaping around on that. Put it out of service, tag it, put it out. So if that's the standard and everybody knows where it goes, there shouldn't be any risk of that component failing or having an incident due to that. Or also having the right tools and equipment for people to do their job. Something as simple as when we're cutting plywood, you don't cut it on the scaffold, you cut it on the ground and send it up, because there's a higher risk of cutting when you're on a uneven surface. With power tools, you want to have it done properly on sawhorses where it's secured, instead of you're on the tube and you're trying to cut something there. So again, it ties back to SOPs or safe work practices. And it's about coaching. If you're really investing in telling people, do it this way, it may feel like it's faster to cut the plywood on the scaffold, but in the long run, if somebody cuts their hand, we're going to be way behind on this one, right? And we're possibly at risk of losing future work for this client. And so getting that understanding that safety is faster in the long run is important, right?
Yeah. Justin, I think you and I could talk about this all day long. I would like to thank you for joining me today for this conversation. I believe that it's part of a bigger conversation about scaffold safety and competency and moving that forward. But I think our time is wrapped up for the day. And once again, thank you kindly for taking part in this talk today. And I will pass it over to the other end of it. But
thank you, Bill. Thank you, Justin, for coming on out and giving that very in-depth and knowledgeable presentation. Absolutely loved it.